This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. Hey everyone, welcome back to Reissued. If you're new here, my name is Andrew. If you are not new here, you know that we are racing toward the finish line in the living room makeover, and today we're going to be taking another giant step forward by painting a massive mural on all of the walls. Now, I feel like wallpaper and murals specifically have been kind of dominating the design scene in the last couple of years with the rise of maximalism and dark academia style, and so many brands are making gorgeous wallpaper murals. I actually am going to be using one next week on a DIY screen that we're making for Katie's bedroom. So when it came to choosing a wall treatment for the living room, I thought that wallpaper or a wall mural would be beautiful. However, wallpapering a room this large would be very expensive, and the walls are quite textured. They had the original plaster finish that's been patched and repaired over the last 100 years, so there's a lot of texture here, and I don't think that wallpaper would look really good on this uneven surface. So we are going to be working with the texture of the walls and hand painting directly onto the walls. I'm drawing inspiration from kind of a Japanese landscape look, but doing it in more of an Italian fresco plaster style finish. And along the way, I'm going to be sharing 10 tips for painting a DIY mural that you might want to add to your mental toolbox if you're thinking about DIYing a mural in your home. I apparently learned nothing from when I hand painted the wallpaper in my guest bathroom, which took me over 4 months to complete, because I'm going to try to get this mural done in under a week. We have a lot to do. Let's get started. Okay, before we get started, if you want to stay up to date on my living room makeover, be sure that you're subscribed and that you check out the living room makeover playlist. I'm putting all of the living room related videos into that playlist so that you can watch them all at once. We actually moved a lot of furniture into this space yesterday and it's all coming together, so be sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss the reveal coming up. And also, just an update about my skin. I mentioned in a previous video that I was dealing with what I thought was some eczema issues on my face. I've had eczema my whole life and this appears to be something else because I just can't kick it. So I have an appointment with a different dermatologist coming up next week, so hopefully I can get some answers. Hopefully I won't be looking like this on camera for that much longer because I don't love it. I don't love to be seen like this. So it is what it is. We're pushing through. We're painting a mural today, so let's get to it. So picking up from where we left off last time, we finished stripping and sanding the trim, we painted the floor, and we also put a base coat on the walls in the shade Tapestry Thread from Magnolia. I had this color matched in a flat shade to create a nice base for our mural. And after everything had a couple days to dry, I couldn't help it. I had to put the rug down in this room to see how it was gonna look. All right, so we finished up the paint on Monday. It is now Friday, and I'm dying to see how the rug looks in this room. So I feel like it's gonna protect the floor more, right? If the rug isn't here. So yeah, let's put the rug down. Why not? I also brought some furniture in here after a couple more days to get a sense of the vibe and layering. And that brings us to tip number 1. Check in on the rest of the design to decide which direction to go in for your mural. In order to ensure that everything ends up feeling cohesive, I think it's important to check in on the bigger picture before making any drastic changes, like painting a giant mural all over your walls. And my takeaway at this point with seeing some furniture that I plan to put in the room is that things are looking pretty good, and that we don't really need a mural in here. We have lots of layering and textures going on already, so I decided not to do a mural, and that's the end of this video. Just kidding, just because we don't need it doesn't mean it won't look amazing, but I do want to make an effort to keep my design streamlined and tight so that we don't make this feel overwhelming. And that's gonna start with the tight color palette. I did some experiments mixing different paints together that I already had on hand from past projects in my house to see what we're working with. Unofficial tip here, we'll call this tip 1B. Use the paints that you already have on hand before going out and buying new paint. I feel like I remember a time in the early 2000s, like Trading Spaces era, where it was like, paint is such a cheap way to make over a space. And now even paint is expensive, so better to not spend a lot of money buying a bunch of different colors for this. We're gonna mix to see what I can get from what I already have. Bonus here is that it's gonna make my house color palette a bit more cohesive by pulling shades from other spaces. Now, I want all the paints that we use for this to be a flat finish to give us that plaster fresco kind of finish. So based on the flat shades that I had left over from other rooms, I think we can work with the decadent wall paint from the studio, the Tapestry Thread base color that we painted the living room walls with, the Coffee Nook ceiling paint from the pantry, which is also the kitchen cabinet shade, and the Prairie Smoke ceiling paint from the bedroom. And I'm also throwing in the shade Cognac as a wild card since I wanted something super warm and orangey, mostly as a mixing agent with other paints. And while I was at Lowe's getting that paint mixed, I found this other paint in the Oops section for $15. It's kind of like a camel warm shade. We could definitely mix this shade from our existing palette, but I thought I might end up using this a lot, so better to have it pre-mixed. With my base shades chosen, I played around more with mixing them together in different combinations to achieve the colors I was looking for. It was helpful to see ahead of time how the colors would mix so that I didn't end up mixing tons of paint only to get the wrong shade. So with some color ideas in mind, let's perfect the layout for the design. I created a starting point for the design using paintings from Japanese artist Yutagawa Kuniyoshi. We're going to simplify the forms and color palette a lot, but this will give me some shapes to start from for that Japanese landscape look. Before taking this to the walls, I took all the measurements for each wall to update my digital drawing to scale by counting the pixels on my shapes. I'm drawing this up in Keynote, which is like Apple's version of PowerPoint, because it's free and because I'm comfortable using it. Creating a rendering to scale is going to be super helpful when painting on such a large scale so that we can be sure to get the proportions right. The style that we're going for here is already kind of stylized and abstracted, so having the proportions be wrong on top of that would just make things look bad. Even still, this doesn't have to be perfect, it's just a reference. Now, let's start sketching in the design. Okay, so I blocked in like the entire other side of the room yesterday, but my camera forgot how to take time lapses, so I got none of that footage. So we're gonna start on this wall today, and I'll talk you through the process and then show you what else I've done so far. Tip number 3 is to use a grid to help create more landmarks when placing your design. For each section, I divided the area into fourths vertically and horizontally with painter's tape. Then I laid a table over my design in Keynote so that I could use the grid to help me fill in my design. This is really helpful for translating the shapes to the wall, especially on very large walls. I'm using a lot of the architectural landmarks of the room with the doors and the windows to help me place things as well. But if you're working on larger walls with fewer doors and windows, having a grid is going to be your best friend. Rather than going in with a bunch of colors right away, I'm opting to sketch everything in with that Oops mixed camel beige to act as a kind of underpainting. This is helpful so that I can focus on just the shapes and not the colors while I lay things in. This will act both as a guide when I start to lay in colors and as a deeper background shade that will add dimension. Getting the effect that I'm looking for is going to be all about layering, and we actually do end up seeing some of this shade in the final look. Note that I'm using a very large brush for this, partly to cover space quickly, but also to keep things from looking too detailed. Extra detail would be a waste of time at this stage, plus the look we're going for is more raw, so big sweeping strokes will be helpful here. Now, if you're thinking to yourself at this point, wow, Andrew, you're such an amazing artist. Where can we buy one of your pieces? You can always place an order on my website that I created with Squarespace, which is the sponsor of today's video. Squarespace is the perfect platform for creating a website to fit all of your e-commerce needs. It's super easy to showcase your products and customize your product listings with images, videos, reviews, and add-ons that will help you make more sales. I need to keep things simple, and the Squarespace commerce platform makes managing everything from inventory to sales to customers super straightforward. So check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use my code REISSUED for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and go check out my website to pick up some art. Now that we have the full underpainting sketched in, we can start to lay in some color. I'm starting with the absolute lightest blue shade first that will go on some of the clouds. So I'm mixing a bit of coffee nook into the wall color to get something that's just slightly deeper and more blue than the base wall color. I numbered the areas on my design to help me decide where to place each color. Again, I'm not using as many shades as in the original artwork, so it's helpful to have a reference for how to place my shades from light to dark. There wasn't much of the lightest shade, so let's go a bit deeper and more blue for the next shade down. In some areas, I want to blend the color into the underpainting camel shade, so I started experimenting with dry brushing, raking over the open area in X shapes with a large brush, wiping almost all the paint off my brush. To achieve that plaster fresco look, I'm borrowing this X technique from the million times that I've seen people do lime washing in the last couple years. They apply the lime wash finish in X's to achieve that plaster look, so why not try that here? Note that I've switched to a smaller brush to help me achieve a little bit more precision with the forms, but also note that that takes away the wonderful rawness that we achieved with the larger brush. I'm taking a mental note of that balance and hoping that we can achieve a better blend of the two moving forward. Another step darker, and there was too much light paint here to get it to go darker, so I started a fresh batch by adding light to dark. I'll use that other mix later. Now, as I go forward, I fully expect to mix shades on the wall to make this feel a bit more painterly and less paint by numbers. However, I decided to start by blocking in large areas of color, both to further define my shapes and to evenly distribute the colors around the room. We want to keep that wallpaper kind of quality here, and going around the room and mixing at random might be a bit too varied and lose that unified look that we're going for. And now let's hit the darkest shade by mixing Coffee Nook with Cognac for a murky green blue. One thing I didn't mention in the layout phase that I think is easier to spot at this stage is the attempted absence of tangent lines. Tangent lines happen when your design lines up perfectly with the edge of the frame, in this case the doors and windows and baseboard. That can make the design feel less dynamic and more contained. So tip number 6 is to avoid tangent lines when laying out your design. So I tried to lay everything out so that the trees wouldn't fall at the same height as the doors or stop right at the edge of the windows. I always wanted to extend the trees right off the edges and behind the trim to make them feel a little bit more integrated and punchy. Now, at this stage, I started to worry. This was starting to look like a giant paint by numbers mixed with like vintage destination postcard. Not that those are bad, I actually really like that look, but that's not the look we're going for here. Which brings me to tip number 7. You will hate your painting at some point. I talked about this last time in discussing the lessons that I learned designing my house, and it seems to creep into every creative process. There's always a point in the process where things just don't feel right. The good thing about painting is that you can always paint over it. The bad thing is that it's often hard to trust the process and stick it out when things start to look busted. So we are trusting here a lot. All right, making progress here. I have one more color just to kind of block in kind of the most mid-tony blue to fill in some areas that I haven't gotten to yet. Overall, this is looking a little bit more cartoony than I would like, so I have some plans to go in and layer up the color to make it less saturated and a little bit deeper. And I'm already planning to go in at the end and do all the background at once and just kind of brush over large areas of this as well with the super dry brush to make this look more faded. I'm thinking this is kind of how the fresco might have looked when it was first freshly painted, but I want this to look like it's been here for 100 years and it's kind of cracking and decaying away. So once we get everything in place, we'll try to age this down a bit, hoping that works, because this is a lot of look. I helped myself see the final vision a bit by testing out some dry brushing with the wall shade over the top of some of the darker colors to see how that might help me achieve the faded effect I'm going for. Okay, this just might work. The next day, I started by mixing up the wall color tapestry thread with some of the underpainting camel shade for a slightly deeper wall shade, and then pouring in more wall color so that we can get a blend of those two for that lime wash effect. And now for the next step of the painting process, we're diving into tip number 8, go off book. Up until this point, we've been painting with one shade at a time, so now let's build a palette with a sampling of all of our shades. Up until now, I've been consulting my reference on my computer every 5 seconds. So now let's ditch the reference entirely and respond to what we are seeing in real life. I'm starting by filling in the negative space between my shapes and using a large brush and those handy X motions and allowing that to bleed into my trees and start the distressing process. Going off book is all about falling into a creative flow where you stop overthinking it and start reacting quickly and impulsively to what the painting needs. Changing the shapes to make the landscape feel more cohesive across panels? Do it. Blending colors that feel too defined? Done. At this point, what I intended or envisioned no longer matters. We have a painting in front of us and we need to make it work. Letting go of the original vision is a part of the creative process that I see a lot of people get stuck on. They have an idea in their minds, and once things start to deviate from that, they shut down. And not only does this shut down the possibility of any happy accidents that are greater than the original idea, but it stops you from pushing through the hard part and seeing that you can come out the other side. And that's a bummer. But yeah, this process is uncomfortable and uncertain, and so I'm putting my blinders on and moving forward as quickly as possible before I have time to second guess myself. As I go, I've switched almost completely back to larger brushes, and I'm changing up my techniques as I make mistakes. I had to wash out the larger brush I was dry brushing with to change colors, and it wasn't dry yet, so I discovered wet brushing, which created a more milky, watered down effect that was very effective in creating a faded look. Too much paint on the brush when dry brushing? Let's scrub the crap out of it with a damp paper towel and create a faded patch. Mistakes are inevitable, but I'm making them work and trying to turn them into new opportunities and new techniques. I'm also taking advantage of the super textured walls, dry brushing the high points and highlighting the natural texture of the wall. I push that even further in some areas by putting wall paint on the side of my brush and rubbing it over those high points again to create a more defined area, as though the darker paint has been rubbed or chipped away over time. Okay, so after a solid 3 days of kind of freaking out about this a little bit and not being sure about how it was gonna work, I feel like I'm breathing a sigh of relief. I feel like this is working. I think that filling in the background and getting texture all over is giving us more of that fresco look and making everything work together and making this feel less scary and graphic. I think that everything's just a little bit softer and more natural, which is what I was going for. I think I'm gonna come back in one more time tomorrow to perfect some of the forms, to drop in some more contrast in some places that we've lost it, to go along the top and the edges with a smaller brush to do my X's, because I didn't really get all the way to the edges and there's a very hard line. And then also to go in with one more layer of dry brushing with just the straight up wall color, just to kind of blend everything together, make it unified and a little bit more distressed. So I'm feeling great about this. We're almost there. The final technique that really brought the whole faded fresco look together was a kind of vignette effect. Like when you're editing a photo and you use a vignette effect to kind of darken the edges of the frame. I did this around the lower corners of the room with a watery mix of my darkest blue-green and prairie smoke gray. I painted it along the edges and then blended out with a paper towel. I did the same along the upper corners and crown molding as well, using the darker of the wall shades. This vignette effect really helped to ground the mural in the room and redefine the architectural elements of the room, especially where the walls met the gray-blue built-ins. So I continued around the room, vignetting and blending until it was time to stop. Which lands us at tip number 10. Know when to stop. I know it's almost impossible to know when to stop, but a deadline definitely helps. I needed this done so that we can install the rolling ladder to send images to the brand for their website. So once everything was feeling pretty good with those final details, good enough is good enough. We're gonna leave it here. I can't promise I won't come back later to do some little tweaks as we start to add more elements of the room and we see how everything's really looking. But for now, the mural is done. Alright everybody, I'm so excited to reveal this to you with the rolling library ladder in place. So exciting. All the elements are coming together for this room and I'm so excited to finally see the vision come to life. Again, if you want to hang in there and see us push this room across the finish line, be sure that you're subscribed. If you enjoyed this video and found some of these tips to be helpful, go ahead and hit the like button. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon.